The first thing I noticed was how quiet the room became when I stopped begging. Moments earlier, my voice had cracked. My knees pressed hard against the concrete floor as I tried to explain why I had come, why I needed help, why I had no one else left to ask. Before we begin, I need your help. We're trying to reach you as your own subscribers, and your support means everything. If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop a comment and tell me your city or country. Let's build this community together. The men around the table barely reacted. They had seen desperation before. It bored them. The room smelled of cigar smoke and old money, the kind of scent that seeps into walls over decades of private dealings. Crystal decanters lined a mahogany bar in the corner, their amber contents untouched, displayed more for intimidation than hospitality. Overhead, a single chandelier cast fractured light across faces that remained deliberately shadowed. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head during the long drive here. I had imagined the words flowing smoothly, my case presented with the kind of calm logic that men like these respected. Instead, my voice had trembled from the first syllable. My carefully constructed arguments had dissolved into raw pleading. They let me speak for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Each word I uttered fell into the silence like stones dropped into deep water, creating ripples that no one acknowledged. Victor Salazar did not interrupt me. He let me speak until my words ran out on their own. Then he waited a few seconds longer, just enough to make the silence uncomfortable. I could feel sweat trickling down my spine, pooling at the small of my back. My knees ached against the unforgiving floor, but I didn't dare shift my weight. Any movement felt like it might shatter whatever fragile tolerance was keeping me alive. "Stand up," he said. I did. My legs shook, but I stayed upright. The simple act of rising felt monumental, like I was claiming some small piece of dignity in a room designed to strip it away. Blood rushed back into my cramped muscles, sending needles of sensation through my calves and thighs. Victor leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Everything in that room moved according to his tone. I studied him in the brief moment I had before speaking again. He was younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, with silver threading through dark hair at his temples. His suit was impeccable, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, tailored so precisely it seemed like a second skin. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark, penetrating, missing nothing. "You came into my house without permission," he said calmly. "You say people are trying to kill you. You want protection. That's a lot to ask." "I can pay," I said quickly. "I'll work, I'll do anything." The words left my mouth before I could consider them, propelled by desperation rather than strategy. I regretted them instantly. That was when the corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile, something colder. "Anything is a dangerous word," he replied. A few men chuckled. One of them shook his head like he was already tired of watching this. I cataloged their faces quickly, a survival instinct I hadn't known I possessed until recently. 7 men total, plus Victor. Some wore suits similar to his, others dressed more casually in expensive leather jackets and designer watches. They ranged in age from mid-20s to late 60s. All of them had the same hardness in their eyes, the look of men who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Victor's eyes never left mine. "You don't belong here," he continued. "You don't look like someone who survives my world." He was right, and we both knew it. 3 months ago, my biggest concern had been whether to take the promotion at work or wait for a better opportunity. I had spent my evenings watching cooking shows and planning weekend trips that never happened. I had never held a weapon. I had never seen someone die. I swallowed. I don't need to belong, I just need to live. That earned me laughter. Real laughter this time, echoing off the walls. I felt heat rush to my face, but I didn't look away. The laughter was cruel but not entirely mocking. Some of these men had probably stood where I stood once, making desperate bargains of their own. They laughed because they remembered, and because remembering made them uncomfortable. Victor raised a hand, and the noise died instantly. The sudden silence was more unsettling than the laughter had been. It demonstrated his power more effectively than any threat could have. "You want me to protect you," he said. "I want to be entertained." He stood, tall and unhurried, and walked toward me. When he stopped, he was close enough that I could smell his cologne, clean and sharp. Up close, I noticed details I had missed from a distance. A thin scar traced his jawline, nearly invisible against his olive skin. His hands were large and well-maintained, nails trimmed precisely, no calluses visible despite the violence his reputation suggested. He moved with the economy of someone who had trained their body to efficiency. "There's a match tonight," he said. "One round, no limits." I stared at him. A match. I knew about the fights that happened beneath his casino. Everyone who lived in the city knew, even if they pretended otherwise. Underground matches where fortunes were won and lost, where sometimes competitors walked out and sometimes they were carried. "If you win," he continued, his voice smooth, "I'll marry you." The room exploded. Men laughed openly now. One slapped the table. Another leaned back, wiping tears from his eyes. The sound bounced off the walls, creating echoes that seemed to multiply the ridicule. Victor didn't laugh. He watched me. His stillness amid the chaos was deliberate, calculated. He wanted to see how I would react when surrounded by mockery, when the absurdity of his offer hung in the air like a challenge. "If you lose," he added, "you won't need protection anymore." I felt my chest tighten, fear pressing in from all sides. I knew what kind of matches happened beneath his casino. I knew who fought in them. The implications of his words were clear. Losing wouldn't mean walking away defeated. Losing meant not walking away at all. This wasn't an offer. It was a test. I should have refused. I should have run. But where would I run to? The people hunting me had found me at 3 different safe houses in 2 weeks. They had resources I couldn't match and patience I couldn't outlast. Every day I remained unprotected was another day closer to ending up like my father. Instead, I lifted my chin and said yes. The laughter stopped. They didn't give me time to rethink my decision. 2 guards escorted me through corridors that twisted beneath the casino like veins beneath skin. The deeper we went, the colder the air became. My heartbeat stayed loud in my ears, steady and unforgiving. The transition from the polished elegance above to the raw functionality below was jarring. Plush carpet gave way to industrial tile, then to bare concrete. Crystal chandeliers were replaced by harsh, fluorescent tubes that hummed with a frequency just audible enough to irritate. We passed closed doors that leaked sounds I didn't want to identify. Somewhere, a man was shouting in a language I didn't recognize. Somewhere else, glass shattered and was quickly swept up. The casino existed on multiple levels, and each level revealed a different aspect of Victor's empire. I replayed everything that had brought me here. My father's body on the warehouse floor, the unanswered calls, the message left on my phone telling me I was next if I didn't disappear. Dad had been a quiet man, an accountant who preferred books to people and numbers to words. For 30 years, he had worked for companies whose names appeared in respectable business journals. I never questioned his late nights or sudden business trips. I never wondered why a man who claimed to hate travel owned 3 passports. The truth had come out only after his death, delivered in fragments by lawyers and investigators who seemed surprised I didn't already know. My father had been creative with more than just spreadsheets. He had moved money for people who couldn't afford official channels, and eventually, he had moved the wrong money for the wrong people. I had tried to disappear. It hadn't worked. When you anger the wrong people, distance doesn't save you. It only delays the inevitable. The guards stopped outside a steel door. One of them looked at me, not unkindly but not hopeful either. He was younger than the others I had seen, perhaps mid-20s, with a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully blank. A tattoo crept up the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, some design I couldn't identify from this angle. "You can still walk away," he said. "And go where?" I asked. He didn't answer. The question hung between us, unanswered because we both knew there was no answer. Walking away meant walking back into the crosshairs of people who had already proven they could find me anywhere. Inside, the fight area buzzed with anticipation. Crowds gathered around the cage, betting, drinking, watching like they were waiting for a show. To them, that's all this was. The space was larger than I expected, carved out beneath the casino with the same engineering precision that characterized everything in Victor's world. Tiered seating surrounded an octagonal cage at the center, the metal bars gleaming under focused spotlights. Screens mounted at intervals displayed odds that fluctuated in real time as money changed hands. The crowd was diverse in a way that surprised me. Men in tuxedos rubbed shoulders with others in leather and denim. Women in evening gowns clinked champagne flutes beside others in combat boots and tank tops. Wealth and its absence mingled here, united by their appetite for violence. A woman handed me a form to sign. No medical check, no waivers, just my name and a signature acknowledging I understood the risks. I signed. The pen felt heavy in my hand, the ink bleeding slightly on the cheap paper. My signature looked wrong somehow, shakier than usual, the letters not quite connecting the way they should. Someone offered me gloves. I shook my head. I didn't want anything that would make me feel safer than I was. False security was more dangerous than none at all. I needed to feel exactly how vulnerable I was, to keep that awareness sharp and present throughout whatever came next. As they led me toward the holding area, I caught a glimpse of Victor watching from above. He leaned against the railing, relaxed, his gaze fixed on me. He had changed since our meeting, replacing his suit jacket with something more casual, though no less expensive. A glass of something amber-colored rested in his hand, untouched. Around him, associates spoke in hushed tones, but his attention never wavered from the cage below. For the first time, doubt crept in. This wasn't bravery, it was necessity. And necessity didn't care if I survived. The bell rang once, loud and sharp. They were calling my name. Victor Salazar had built his empire on two things: patience and memory. Everyone in that room knew it. They remembered the men who had laughed at him once and never laughed again. They remembered the deals he kept and the ones he didn't forgive. His rise had been documented in whispers and rumors, pieced together from fragments that might or might not have been true. Some said he had started as a street fighter himself, building his reputation one brutal victory at a time. Others claimed he had inherited his position, though no one could agree on who had preceded him. What everyone agreed on was this: Victor Salazar never forgot, and he never acted without purpose. As I stood inside the cage, barefoot and unarmed, I felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. The mat beneath my feet was surprisingly clean, the canvas stretched tight over padding that would do little to cushion a hard fall. The cage bars were cold when I brushed against them, metal worn smooth by countless hands seeking support. He wasn't watching for entertainment anymore. He was studying me. Most people tried to impress Victor by showing fear or loyalty. I showed neither. I stood still, breathing evenly, my hands relaxed at my sides. It wasn't courage, I was terrified. But terror had passed through some threshold in my body and emerged as a strange calm on the other side. My heart beat fast but steady. My mind raced but focused. He noticed. One of his lieutenants leaned in and whispered something. Victor didn't respond. His eyes never left me. I wondered what he saw. A woman in borrowed clothes, barely 5'4", with no visible muscle definition and no experience in combat. Statistics would have me dead within the first minute. The crowd quieted as my opponent approached. Victor straightened slightly, his interest sharpening. He didn't expect me to win. That wasn't the point. The point was what I would do when I started losing. It was a test of character, not capability. He wanted to see if I would beg, if I would cheat, if I would give up, if I would fight dirty. He wanted to know who I was when all my options had been stripped away. I looked up at him once, just long enough for him to see that I understood the stakes. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. The bell rang again. Her name was Riene. People said it softly, like a warning. She stepped into the cage with calm confidence, rolling her shoulders, her expression focused. She had fought here before. She had won here before. I could see it in her posture, the way she claimed the space without effort. Riene was everything I wasn't. Tall, muscular, with the coiled readiness of someone who had trained for years. Tattoos covered her arms, intricate designs that probably told stories I couldn't read. Her hair was cropped short, practical, and her eyes held the flat assessment of a predator sizing up prey. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of face that might have been beautiful in a different context. Here, in the harsh light of the fighting pit, she looked exactly like what she was, dangerous. She looked me over, not dismissively but curiously. I could see her calculating, the same way I might have calculated a difficult equation. She was measuring my reach, my stance, my breathing, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. The assessment took only seconds. "You don't belong here," she said quietly. Her voice was unexpectedly soft, with a slight accent I couldn't place. It didn't match the hardness of her appearance. "I know," I replied. She studied my face for a moment longer, then sighed. "Try to stay on your feet." It wasn't cruelty in her voice, something closer to resignation. She had probably seen others like me. People who wandered into Victor's arena thinking desperation was the same as capability. The bell rang. She moved fast. The first strike hit my shoulder, hard enough to stagger me. The second caught my ribs, knocking the breath from my lungs. The crowd roared approval. Pain exploded through my torso, sharp and immediate, and more intense than anything I had experienced before. I had read about combat, watched documentaries, understood intellectually that getting hit would hurt. Understanding was nothing like experiencing. I forced myself not to panic. Pain was information. I used it. I moved when she moved, retreated when she pressed, letting her dictate the pace while I learned her rhythm. She was strong but predictable, efficient but impatient. Her fighting style was technical, trained in some formal discipline I couldn't name. Each strike followed logically from the last, creating combinations that would have been devastating against an equally trained opponent. Against me, they were merely overwhelming. A knee caught me in the thigh and I nearly fell. I caught the cage instead, forcing myself upright as cheers turned to taunts. The crowd's enthusiasm was cruel and immediate. They wanted blood, spectacle, the primal satisfaction of watching someone break. My struggle to remain standing seemed to amuse them. Riene frowned. "You're still standing," she muttered. I didn't answer. I was too busy adjusting. Something was shifting in my perception. The initial shock of combat was fading, replaced by a heightened awareness I hadn't known I possessed. Time seemed to stretch slightly, each of her movements becoming more readable. The next time she lunged, I was ready. I stopped trying to trade blows. Instead, I watched her feet. Every time she attacked, she leaned forward just a fraction too much. Every time she missed, her balance shifted for half a second. Half a second was all I needed. The observation came from somewhere I couldn't identify, some dormant instinct triggered by mortal necessity. I had never studied fighting, never analyzed combat footage, never trained my eyes to see what I was suddenly seeing. But I saw it now, as clearly as I might have seen a pattern in a spreadsheet. I ducked under her swing, drove my shoulder into her center, and felt the impact travel through both of us. She recovered quickly, shoving me away, but the surprise was enough to slow her. The crowd grew louder, confused now. Murmurs rippled through the spectators, odds shifting in real time on the screens above. Whatever they had expected, it wasn't this. Riene attacked harder, frustration creeping into her movements. She wanted this over. Her technique was slipping, precision giving way to force. The combinations became less clean, more predictable in their aggression. She was trying to overwhelm me with power rather than outthink me with skill. I let her think she was winning. Each hit I took, I absorbed. Each retreat I made, I studied. I was building a map of her patterns, understanding the rhythm of her attack as intimately as a musician learns a score. When she grabbed my arm, I twisted with the motion, using her grip to pull her off balance. We hit the mat together, the impact jarring, painful. The mat wasn't as soft as it looked. The collision drove the air from my lungs again, sent stars spinning across my vision. For a moment, I thought I might black out. She tried to pin me. I slipped free. My body was moving faster than my conscious mind could direct it, acting on observations I hadn't consciously made. I was out from under her before I fully registered that I had escaped. I heard Victor stand. The sound was small, the scrape of a chair, the rustle of fabric, but it cut through the crowd noise with perfect clarity. That sound gave me clarity. I struck once, twice, focusing everything I had left into precision instead of power. Renee reeled, stunned more than hurt. My blows weren't strong enough to truly damage her, but they were placed perfectly. Temple, throat, solar plexus, points that disrupted rather than destroyed. I didn't hesitate. I used her momentum, forced her down, and held her there as the bell rang. She didn't move. For a long moment, neither did I. I kept my weight distributed carefully, my grip firm but not cruel, waiting to see if she would surge up and continue the fight. The crowd went silent. It was the kind of silence that preceded either celebration or catastrophe. No one had expected this outcome. No one knew how to react. I stayed where I was, chest heaving, waiting for someone to tell me it wasn't over. Victor's voice carried across the room. Enough. I released her and stood, every muscle burning, my vision blurred at the edges. My legs shook so badly I thought I might collapse. Blood roared in my ears, making it difficult to hear. My hands trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline. No one laughed. Victor looked at me, the way a man looks at a decision he can't undo. And I knew my life had just changed. Victor did not congratulate me. He didn't smile, didn't clap, didn't acknowledge the stunned faces around him. He simply descended the steps toward the cage with the same calm confidence he carried everywhere else. The crowd parted without being told. They moved aside like water around a stone, creating a clear path from the observation platform to the cage floor. Some looked at him with respect, others with fear, but all of them moved. I stood still, unsure whether to bow, speak, or remain silent. My body trembled now that the fight was over, pain catching up with me in sharp waves. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving behind a catalog of injuries I hadn't noticed during combat. My shoulder throbbed where Renee's first punch had landed. My ribs ached with each breath. Bruises were already forming beneath my borrowed clothes. Victor stopped a few feet away. Up close, his composure was even more unsettling. Nothing in his expression revealed what he was thinking. No surprise, no admiration, no disappointment, just assessment. "You fought intelligently," he said. "That matters more than strength." I waited for the insult that usually followed praise in places like this. It never came. He turned to the crowd. "The deal stands." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some people protested quietly. Others stared at me like they were reassessing everything they thought they knew. I caught fragments of conversation, incredulous tones, skeptical questions, the rustle of money changing hands as bets were settled in ways no one had anticipated. Victor looked back at me. "You'll be taken upstairs. Medical staff will see you." I nodded. There was nothing else to do. I had made a bargain, and I would honor it, even if I didn't fully understand what honoring it would mean. As guards escorted me away, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't being dismissed. I was being claimed. The ceremony was private and fast. No guests, no celebration, just signatures, witnesses, and a judge who didn't ask questions. We stood in a room that might have been elegant under different circumstances. Wood-paneled walls, leather furniture, the kind of understated wealth that whispered rather than shouted. But the occasion stripped away any warmth the space might have offered. Victor stood beside me, composed and distant. He didn't touch me, didn't pretend this was anything other than what it was. He wore the same clothes from earlier, though someone had brushed away whatever dust or debris he might have collected. His hands were steady as he signed document after document, his expression unchanged. A contract made public. When the judge pronounced us married, Victor inclined his head politely and stepped back. There was no kiss, no embrace, no acknowledgement of the magnitude of what had just occurred. We signed the final papers, received our copies, and were escorted to separate vehicles for the drive to his estate. In the car afterward, silence stretched between us. The vehicle was luxurious, soft leather seats, tinted windows, the kind of soundproofing that made the outside world feel distant and irrelevant. Victor sat on the opposite side, maintaining the maximum possible distance within the confined space. "You understand what this means," he said at last. Yes. I understood more than he probably realized. Marriage to Victor Salazar meant protection, but it also meant exposure. Every enemy he had ever made would now consider me a target. Every alliance he had built would scrutinize me for weakness. "You will live in one of my houses. You'll have security at all times." "And freedom?" I asked. He glanced at me. "You'll be alive." That was his version of reassurance. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was honest. In his world, survival was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Freedom, happiness, comfort, those were luxuries that came later if they came at all. As the car pulled into the gated property, I watched iron doors slide shut behind us. The estate was massive, sprawling across manicured grounds that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Security cameras tracked our approach, visible at intervals along the high walls. Guards patrolled with the kind of casual alertness that suggested constant readiness. I had one protection. I had lost anonymity. Life inside Victor's world followed strict patterns. Schedules, guards, cameras, doors that opened only when permitted. Every morning began at the same time, marked by a soft knock and the appearance of breakfast on a tray outside my door. Every evening ended with a security check, someone verifying my location and well-being before the house settled into its nighttime routines. I was given clothes, a room, and access to everything I needed to survive. What I didn't have was choice. My quarters were comfortable in a sterile way, neutral colors, minimal decoration, furniture selected for function rather than warmth. A window overlooked the gardens, but the glass was reinforced, designed to resist attempts at entry or exit. Victor checked on me once a day, sometimes more, sometimes not at all. His visits followed no pattern I could discern. Sometimes he appeared in the morning, asking brief questions about my comfort before disappearing. Other times he came late at night, standing in my doorway as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He never raised his voice, never threatened me. He didn't have to. The house itself was the threat, with its cameras and guards and carefully controlled access. Escape was theoretically possible but practically suicidal. I was protected, but I was also imprisoned. One evening, I found him in the training room, watching security footage. The room was impressive, state-of-the-art equipment, mirrored walls, a sparring area with padded floors. Multiple screens displayed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the property, and I suspected, locations far beyond it. "I don't want to be guarded forever," I said. He didn't look away from the screen. "That's not up to you." "It should be," I replied. "I didn't marry you to become furniture." That got his attention. He turned, studying me carefully. For the first time since the fight, I saw something other than assessment in his eyes, something that might have been curiosity or respect, or simply surprise that I had challenged him at all. "What do you want?" he asked. "To learn," I said. "If I'm going to survive here, I need to stand on my own." The words came out stronger than I felt, inside. I was terrified of his response, terrified that he would dismiss me, or laugh, or simply return to his screens as though I hadn't spoken. He considered this longer than I expected. His expression shifted through calculations, I couldn't follow, weighing options and outcomes with the same precision he applied to everything else. Finally, he nodded once. "We'll see." Training began the next morning. Victor didn't go easy on me, and he didn't allow excuses. I trained until my hands blistered, until my muscles screamed, until exhaustion blurred the edges of my vision. The regimen was brutal and comprehensive. Hand-to-hand combat, weapons familiarity, situational awareness, tactical decision-making under pressure. Each discipline built upon the last, creating a framework of skills I hadn't known I needed. He watched everything. Not like a coach, like a strategist. He rarely offered praise, but was quick to point out errors. Each mistake became a lesson, analyzed and corrected until I could perform the correct action without conscious thought. I learned quickly, faster than he expected. Something had awakened during that first fight, some capacity for adaptation that had lain dormant throughout my previous life. The same instincts that had helped me read Rione's patterns now helped me absorb new techniques at an accelerated rate. Weeks passed, then months. The woman who had begged on her knees in Victor's meeting room gradually disappeared, replaced by someone harder, more capable, more aware. I could feel the change in the way I moved, the way I assessed rooms, the way I carried myself. I stopped flinching at loud noises. I stopped relying on guards to feel safe. I learned to read rooms the way Victor did, to notice shifts in behavior before they became threats. My body transformed as well. Muscle replaced softness. Posture improved. The clothes that had hung loosely when I arrived now fit properly, filled by someone who had earned the space she occupied. One night, after a particularly brutal session, Victor handed me a glass of water. The gesture was simple but significant. He rarely served anyone, preferring to have others attend to such details. The fact that he had poured the water himself, had handed it to me directly, meant something. "You're not who you were," he said. "I know," I replied. I barely recognized my own reflection anymore. The fear was still there, but it had been tempered by competence. The desperation had been replaced by something closer to determination. His gaze lingered on me longer than necessary. "You're becoming someone people should worry about," he added. I met his eyes. That was the point. For the first time, he smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his face in ways I hadn't expected. For a moment, he looked almost human, capable of emotions beyond calculation and control. The first warning came quietly. A delay in a shipment, a driver who didn't report in, a guard who asked a question twice. Small irregularities that might have meant nothing individually, but together suggested a pattern. Something was shifting in the ecosystem around us, changes too subtle for most people to notice. Victor noticed everything. That was the problem. He didn't tell me right away. He never did when things were serious. Instead, security tightened. Routes changed. Conversations lowered when I entered a room. Guards who had grown comfortable in their routines became alert again. Additional personnel appeared at checkpoints. Weapons that had been locked away were quietly relocated to accessible positions. I noticed anyway. The training had sharpened my awareness beyond what even Victor had probably intended. I could feel the tension building, sense the unspoken concern in the way people moved and spoke. One night, I found a file on the desk in the study. It wasn't hidden. That meant it was meant to be seen. The study was Victor's sanctuary, a space he rarely shared. The fact that he had left a file there in plain sight was either a test or an invitation, possibly both. Inside were photos. My father. Me. Dates, locations, names I hadn't heard since the night he died. The images were surveillance photos, taken over a period of months. Some showed my father leaving his office. Others captured me at coffee shops, grocery stores, walking to my car after work. Ordinary moments transformed into evidence of systematic observation. When Victor entered the room, I didn't look up. "They didn't stop looking for me, did they?" "No," he said, "and they won't." I closed the file. Then this ends one way. The truth settled over me with surprising calm. The people who had killed my father weren't going to forget about me. They weren't going to be satisfied with my disappearance. This situation had only one resolution. He watched me carefully. You don't get to decide that alone. I'm already involved, I said, whether you like it or not. For a moment, we stood on opposite sides of the room, equal in distance and stubbornness. The tension between us had shifted over the months. What began as captor and captive, transaction and commodity, had evolved into something more complex. We weren't equals, not yet, but we weren't simply playing roles anymore either. They're coming, he finally said, and they won't underestimate you again. They attacked just before dawn. Not loud, not rushed, professionals. The assault was precisely timed to exploit the vulnerable window between night shift and morning shift, when guards were at their most fatigued and routines were transitioning. The first alarm never sounded because the system was already compromised. I woke to movement, not noise. Some part of my brain, trained over months to monitor my environment even in sleep, registered the anomaly before consciousness fully returned. Something was wrong, not obviously wrong, but subtly, critically wrong. Training took over. I rolled out of bed, reached for the weapon hidden where Victor insisted it stay, and positioned myself where I could see the door without being seen. The gun felt familiar in my hand, an extension of my arm rather than a foreign object. Months of practice had made the weight and balance second nature. My breathing slowed automatically, preparing my body for whatever came next. Two men entered. They expected panic. They found preparation. The first man came through the door in a combat stance, weapon raised, eyes scanning for a target he expected to find cowering in a corner or fumbling with the sheets. Instead, he found an empty bed and shadows that revealed nothing. I moved before he could adjust his expectations. The training Victor had drilled into me took over, translating intention into action without the delay of conscious thought. The fight was fast and brutal. No crowd, no rules, only survival. The second man was faster, more experienced, but the narrow confines of the room limited his options. He couldn't use his size advantage, couldn't create the distance his training probably required. By the time Victor arrived, it was over. He appeared in the doorway with two guards behind him, weapons drawn, ready for combat that had already concluded. His eyes swept the room, cataloging the bodies, the blood, the position of my weapon. He looked at the bodies, then at me. "You didn't wait," he said. "I didn't need to," I replied. Something shifted between us in that moment. Not approval, acceptance. I had proven something he hadn't been entirely certain of, that the investment he had made in training me had paid off, that I could be more than a liability to protect. Later, as the house returned to order, Victor sat beside me, closer than he ever had before. The aftermath was handled with the efficiency I had come to expect from his operation. Bodies were removed, damage was assessed and repairs scheduled. Security protocols were reviewed and strengthened. "They came because of you," he said. "They failed because of me," I answered. He nodded slowly. The confession didn't come during the chaos. It came afterward, when silence returned and the danger felt distant enough to acknowledge. We sat in the study, the same room where I had found the file, where so many of our significant conversations had occurred. The first light of morning filtered through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. Victor stood at the window, his back to me. "I never planned to care." "I know," I said. The admission shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Victor Salazar didn't discuss feelings. He discussed strategies, outcomes, probabilities. Emotion was a variable he preferred to eliminate from his calculations. "You were supposed to be leverage," he continued. "A solution." A solution to what? I wondered. A way to draw out enemies. A tool for some negotiation I didn't understand. The marriage had never made complete sense to me, even accounting for his stated desire for entertainment. "And now?" I asked. He turned. Now you're the one thing I can't afford to lose. The words landed heavier than any promise. They weren't romantic, not in any conventional sense. They were practical, strategic, the language of a man who processed the world through calculations of risk and value. But within that framework, they were as close to a declaration as Victor Salazar was likely to offer. I stepped closer. This started as a deal. And became a risk, he said. We didn't touch, we didn't need to. Some truths didn't require closeness to be real. The distance between us remained, but its nature had changed. It was no longer a barrier but a choice, space that either of us could close when the time was right. Victor didn't wait for the next move. He struck first. The passivity that had characterized the preceding months, the waiting, the watching, the gradual accumulation of intelligence, gave way to decisive action. Victor began dismantling the network that threatened us with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. Meetings were called, alliances tested, enemies exposed. I watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Victor I had come to know was controlled, deliberate, patient. This Victor was something else, a force of nature disguised as a man, reshaping the landscape of power around us through sheer will. I wasn't sidelined, I was included. My role evolved from protected asset to active participant. I attended meetings, reviewed intelligence, offered analysis that drew on my months of training and observation. Victor listened to my input, sometimes agreeing, sometimes pushing back, always treating my perspective as worthy of consideration. When the final confrontation came, it wasn't dramatic, it was precise. Calculated. Necessary. The details were not pleasant, and I won't pretend they were. People died who probably deserved to die, and possibly some who didn't. Justice, in Victor's world, was a flexible concept, applied according to rules that outsiders couldn't fully understand. Standing beside Victor as it ended, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It was about control of the future. My father's death had been a consequence of his choices, but my survival would be a consequence of mine. The threat that had driven me to Victor's door was being eliminated not through running or hiding, but through confrontation and mastery. When it was over, Victor looked at me, searching my face for doubt. I found none. Life didn't return to normal. There was no normal to return to. But there was balance. The weeks following the confrontation brought changes I hadn't anticipated. The constant surveillance that had characterized my early months in Victor's world gradually relaxed. Guards were reassigned. Restrictions were lifted. I moved through the house freely now. Guards watched less closely. Decisions included my voice. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Victor's world still operated according to its own rules, still required vigilance and awareness, still involved elements I preferred not to examine too closely. But within that framework, I had carved out a space of my own. One evening, Victor joined me on the terrace. The sun was setting over the estate, painting the gardens in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of view that might have seemed beautiful to someone who hadn't learned to scan every shadow for threats. "You won the match," he said, "but you also chose to stay." "So did you," I replied. He considered that, then nodded. The observation was accurate. At any point in the preceding months, he could have dissolved our arrangement. The marriage was legal but could have been ended. The protection could have been withdrawn. He had kept me not because he was obligated to, but because he had decided to. What began as a challenge, meant to break me, became something neither of us expected. Not a bargain. Not a trap. A choice. And this time, it was mutual. I never learned to love the violence that characterized Victor's world. Some parts of it remained forever foreign to me, elements I tolerated but never embraced. But I learned to love the man who had offered me impossible terms and been surprised when I met them. I learned to appreciate the strange honor that governed his actions, the loyalty he demanded and reciprocated, The way he had seen something in me that I hadn't known existed. The woman who had begged for help on her knees disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who no longer needed to beg. I became Victor's partner in ways that extended beyond the legal documents we had signed that first night. An advisor, a confidant, a counterweight to the isolation that power inevitably creates. Some nights I still dreamed about the fight, about Renee's fist connecting with my ribs, about the crowd's laughter and subsequent silence, about the moment when I chose to say yes to an impossible proposition. Those dreams weren't nightmares, they were reminders. I had walked into Victor Salazar's world expecting to die, and instead, I had found a reason to live. The match had been his test. What came after was mine.